list of materials used in this project, check out the description below and click on Show More. There's some other good stuff down there, so you'll want to make sure you check it out. We're going to begin our drama queen by doing some bezeling on Rivolis. I have 14 millimeter Rivolis, and you can see here I have one that's just not had any work done on it. This drama queen's had no work done on her yet. This is just my plain Rivoli. This is my Rivoli that I've added just the one bezel to. And then this is my Rivoli after I've added the bezel around the Rivoli itself. And I've added this additional layer of bezeling on the outside. And of course, we'll stitch that together. So just wanted to give you guys a little life cycle here of that Rivoli. So I'm going to move these two out of the way. And just one quick note on the reason I'm doing them in the order that I'm doing them. I'm starting by doing my bezel on the Rivoli first, because that will always remain, or that will determine how big I make this outside piece. If you follow my my counts with Miyuki Seed Beads, then it should work out the same every time. But we all know that there's occasionally inconsistencies, or you're using a different size seed bead, and so you need to make adjustments. So if you're doing anything slightly different than what I'm doing here, and counts are slightly different, you're going to want to start by doing the bezel on the Rivoli, and then making the outside bezel to fit the inside bezel. So I would always start by making this, and then moving on to your outside. Okay, so enough not beading. We need to get into the beading here. I'm going to start with my 11-0 seed beads, and I have my galvanized champagne color here. And I'm going to pick up 32 of my 11-0 seed beads. I have a stop bead here that I've picked up at the end, and then I've added an additional 31 beads. I'm going to take my needle and thread here and pass through my stop bead, and I'll go through the next bead too, just for a little extra security there, just because it makes it a little bit easier to give it a nice tight pull and pull everything and cinch it together if you go through more than one. So this is how a lot of projects start: picking up a series of seed beads and then simply going back through a couple to pull it into a circle. And that gives you a nice foundation to start building off of. I'm going to then pick up an 11-0 seed bead and go back through the bead that my thread is coming out of. So I'm coming out of one seed bead, I'm picking up another, and then just passing through that bead again. So I've got my original circle here. So if you hear me refer to that original circle, that's this circle that I made at the very beginning. And then I've got my second row of seed beads of 11-0s, and that's simply going to be the 11-0s that I'm adding now. So my second row is going to be what I'm adding on. So I've gone through, I've picked up one 11-0, I've gone back through, or I've continued through, again, looped around and gone back through the seed bead that is part of that original circle. And when I do that, I should just have the 11-0 that I added sit right next to the 11-0 that's on that original circle. They're just little friends hanging out there, like they have desks next to each other at school. And so I'm going to go on to the next seed bead, and I'm going to pass through the next seed bead on that circle. And I want to pull my thread tight and make sure I'm not getting my thread caught on anything. I do that a lot. Pull that through. And as you pull through, I also want to keep my thread maybe wrapped around a finger or so, my extra thread here at the end, the tail thread, because that'll just help to pull all the thread running through my seed beads here nice and tight, so we don't have a lot of gaps and it doesn't get kind of unruly to work with. So coming out of that second seed bead in the circle, I'm going to do the same thing here where I pick up one seed bead, but now I have a seed bead sitting here that I just added in the previous step. So I'm going to go down through that seed bead, and then I'm going to go up through the two seed beads that are part of my original loop. And I'm going to move on through one more seed bead, through the next seed bead in that loop. I'm going to pick up an 11-0, and I'm going to go down through the previous seed bead that I added on the outside. So that second seed bead in my second row. And I'm going to go up through the two seed beads that are in that loop, sitting right next to the two on my second row, and continue on through the next seed bead in the loop. So from here on out, it's going to be these same couple steps until I get back to the beginning. We're going to pick up one 11-0 seed bead, down through two, and then up through the same two seed beads, the seed beads sitting directly next to those beads on the other side. Actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said down through two. I'm going to go down through one. So scratch that, down through one, and then back up through the two that are sitting next to the two that I just passed through. Here, they're little buddies on the outside. And we're going to keep doing this. So I'll show you one more time. Through the next seed bead on my loop, pick up one 11-0, pass down through the 11-0 that I just added on the second row there, and then up through the two seed beads that sit right next to the two seed beads that I have at the end of my second row. I'm pulling things here. So now as you do this, and you can see here, it's easy to kind of get loose. So if I pull my tail thread here, that'll tighten it up again. So you can see that I'm essentially adding a second row to the loop of seed beads that I have. But because this is a loop, as I work on it, it's going to pull, and it's going to want the second row to sit right above the original loop there. So as you work on it, it's not going to sit to the outside like how I have it here right now, because there aren't that many beads, so there's not much pulling it in place. So right now it's kind of sitting off to the side. It's flat, it's very like 2D, but this is going to become 3D the more beads you add, and this piece to the outside here, the second row, will get pulled upward, so it'll sit right on top of the loop. So I'll have two loops, just kind of like two, like a top and bottom of an Oreo cookie, but no filling yet. So we're going to keep going with this until we get back to the beginning here and just connect our ends. So I'm going to work on this a little bit more and show you what it looks like once you get far enough that it starts to pull in on itself and become 3D. I've made a little bit of progress here on my bezel, and so I wanted to show you how it should look for you at this point. I still have several seed beads here to work on, but you can see that now I have sort of like a little ribbon here, it should kind of feel like, of two rows of seed beads just sitting directly next to each other as I work on this. So I kind of get to the point here where I can hold it with my thumb and I can work sort of in this direction, or if you want to put it on your finger, because it's right about the size that it fits on my finger, at least it fits pretty well. So once you have that, a little bit of this done, you can start kind of holding it like this if you want. So just whatever works for you to kind of get in that rhythm. But I wanted to take a minute here just to show you how it should look for you and how it should stack one on top of the other. So from the view looking down, you should really only be able to see one row of seed beads, and you flip it to the side and you see two. And you see that makes a lot of sense because around a Rivoli, that is what it's going to look like. So these 2 rows of seed beads here are what we're working on now. So hopefully yours looks the same or very, very similar. If not, go back and rewatch the first clip or wait for a pattern and get the pattern or the kit. So we're going to continue here. I'm going to move on. I want to take a minute here to show you that. And now I'm going to go ahead and continue this and show you how to finish it once you get back to the beginning. I am now at the point where I've added all of the 11 rows that I needed to the original circle, so my whole second row is complete. The very last thing I need to do here is connect this part where I have this little split or gap because I've not connected the 2 ends together. The first row here, or that first loop that I made, of course already has that thread running through it, but the top doesn't. So what I'm going to do is simply, whatever bead I'm coming out of, which should be the bead that is part of your first loop, I'm just going to go forward, just like I would normally, through the bead directly after it. And then instead of picking up any beads, I'm only going to pass up through the bead directly next to it in that second row that I added and through the next bead. So I'm passing through what is actually the very first bead and then the very last bead of that second row. And by doing that, I'm going to add that thread running between them and that'll pull them together. So now I can go down on the other side here, down through that 1 seed bead that I'm sitting next to. And that will sort of complete that connection. If you see any gaps, if you need to do anything additional, you can sort of go back up and down through those 2 beads again that are sitting next to each other, just to pull any slack together if you need to. But that is really all we should have to do, is just connect the 2 seed beads that the very first and last seed bead of that second row with a, just make sure we have that thread running through them to close that circle. So now we have a nice seamless, what looks like a little ring. Way too small for any of my fingers, but now we have a nice little ring that our bezel, or that our Rivoli, will sit into. And it will sit into it much better when I get those 15s on, which is the next step. So I'm going to remove my 11 O's, pull out my 15 O's, and then we will be ready to tackle the next part of our bezel. The next part of our bezel is going to be done in the same way as adding the first or second row of 11 O's. But I'm going to add the 15 O's to one of my rows of 11 O's. It doesn't really matter which one, because we're going to add the 15 O's on either side, the front and back, to both sets of 11 O's. And you can see here how that works. I've got my 11 O's running on the side, and then I have 15 O's to cinch that bezel in on the top and on the bottom. And those 15 O's are really what makes it a bezel, what makes it something that is going to hold the crystal in place and create a nice sort of casing around the bead. I don't know that I ever really used the word casing before talking about bezeling or seed beading, but creating that casing or pocket is kind of a good way to explain it. So we're going to add those 15 O's right now. Coming out of one of your 11 O's, we're going to pick up a 15 O and go back through the 11 O. And move forward here. So we're going to pass through the next 11 O seed bead, pick up one 15 O, and following the same steps with just a different size bead, I'm going to pass back through the first 15 O I picked up and then the 2 11-0s that are sitting next to them. And you can either do this separately or at the same time here. I'm also going to go ahead and pass through the next 11-0 so that I now am coming out of an 11-0 that doesn't have a 15-0 sitting next to it. I'm going to pick up a 15-0 and go back down through the 11-0 I previously added and up through the 2 11-0s sitting next to the 15-0s. And while I'm here, I'll also go through the next 11-0 to get myself in place to add the next 15. So this is the same exact steps that we followed to add the second row of 11-0s to that original loop of 11-0s. But in this step here, we're just switching out the 15s for the 11s. So what that will do is it will pull the 15-0s into the center. And as you can see, like I showed you here, it'll pull them in over top of or pull them into the middle of your project or of your piece so that it will hold the edge of that Rivoli in. So I'm going to work on this for a little bit and show you what that looks like. And then we'll go ahead and finish this up, and we will do the same thing on the other side too. Once I finished adding all of my 15-0s, I'm going to connect them in the same way that I did with the 11-0s. I am currently coming out of one of my 11-0s, and so I'm going to go up through one of the 15-0s and across to the next 15-0. So I'm going through both the first and the last 15-0 where I have that little gap between where I started and where I stopped. And now I'm going to go through all of the 15-0s, just one after the other, making sure that my thread and needle go through each 15-0. And what this will do is just pull all of those 15-0s closer together, and it will pull it and cinch it over that center hole here in the bezel so that it'll create a nice little rim that will hold in my Rivoli. So as I pass through my 15-0s, I only need to pass through them once. So as I pass through here, I'm going to continue until I get to where I started, or as close to where I started as I can find here. Right about there. I went past it by a few beads, and that's okay. So I'm going to have a nice little tight pull. It's going to look a little wonky. It may not look exactly like a circle yet, but that's okay because once I get my Rivoli in there, the Rivoli will help hold its shape. I'm going to now take my needle and thread, and I'm just going to pass through some beads here on the side, kind of going up and down through these beads to get to the other side where I need to add the other set of 15-0s. So I'm going to go through an 11-0 below where my 15-0 is coming out. And this one was just a particularly hard one to get through. Must have a knot or something in there. And through another 15-0, or sorry, through another 11-0. And now my thread will be coming out of an 11-0 on the other side here, ready to add more 15-0s. I'm going to start adding those 15-0s and finish them exactly the same way. But before I finish it completely, I want to make sure that I have my 14 millimeter Rivoli in the bezel here. So I actually found that it was really good to work with the Rivoli in place, because then as I worked around, I could hold that Rivoli in place, and the Rivoli actually helped to hold my seed beads in place, which made them a little bit easier to work with. So I like to do that. I like to add that Rivoli in there, and then start working on adding my 15-0s. Now that I've finished both sides of my bezel with the 15-0s, I'm going to just take my needle and thread and tie that off. I want to take my needle and thread and tie off between the 15-0 seed beads. I don't want any knots between any of the 11-0 seed beads. We're going to use those 11-0s later to connect to the larger sort of section, this like halo section of the bail, of the bezels, excuse me. So we don't want any of our knots running through any of those 11-0 seed beads. So we're going to tie off on the back here using just your 15-0 seed beads for any kind of place to anchor and tie. And then you can go ahead and thread burn or cut with some scissors any of those extra threads. You can see I have a couple here. Now, after you complete this bezel, I like to take my fingers and just sort of squish it into place, because as you're working with it, it can be really malleable. It can be easy to kind of move and get it sort of not quite centered the way you want it. So I like to take my fingers and just kind of push it into place. And you can see it kind of quite easily can kind of move around. So I like to get it looking pretty good right now. It will look much better and it'll stay in place once you have it anchored and connected to this outside piece. But I just like to start with it looking close to what I want it to, and then I'll just make it easier when I get to the part where I'm connecting it to this. So you're going to continue here, and you're going to make however many bezeled rivolis you need for the bracelet. I'm going to do 5 total, and that'll make a pretty large but average size bracelet. And then I'll show you at the end. And if you need to, you can always modify this and do more or less rivolis depending on what size wrist you want. We don't get to choose what size wrist we want, but just depending on what size wrist you're trying to fit, or if you want to adapt this design into something larger or longer, like a necklace, of course, you're going to need more rivolis. So that is how to make this portion of the portion of the bracelet here with our simple little bezel for those rivolis. We're now going to move on to making these, what I like to call these halo sections. We are now ready to create this this really sort of fun component that you can do any number of things. I chose to put a rivoli in the center and use this as an expansion on an already bezeled rivoli. But you can take these links, and before you finish them, you can interlock them so they hang together. You can take them, push this up for a second, you can take them as is and just sort of build them into different things. You can connect them and have a bracelet or necklace that doesn't have anything in the center. So it's really good jumping off point for a number of different designs. This is using herringbone and in 3 different size seed beads. And that's what's going to get you this nice sort of donut shape. So you're going to have 8 O's here on the outside, and we're going to have 11 O's and 15 O's. So I've got all 3 of my seed beads out, and I'm going to start with my 15-0 seed beads. I'm going to pick up one 15-0 just to use this as my stop bead. So I'm just going to go back through that bead, and I'm going to leave a little bit of tail thread here just so that I have enough to tie off at the end. I'm not going to need to attach anything like a clasp or anything to it, so just enough to throw it, put a needle on and tie it off at the end. So I've got my one seed bead that I've used here as my stop bead, my 15-0, and I'm going to pick up another 15-0 and 2 more 15-0s for a total of 4 15-0s. Pass up through the first 2 15-0s here. So your stop bead and the 15-0 after that. And as you pull through, your 2 seed beads that you didn't pass through again will just sit directly next to them. And I'm going to go down through those 2 seed beads that are now sitting next to the first set of seed beads. And now I'm going to move on to the 11-O's. And here I'm starting this with a bit of a ladder stitch. So if this looks familiar, it's ladder stitch. It's not herringbone yet. 2 11-ohs in, I have a seafoam color here, and down through my 2 15-ohs. Pull that tight, up through the 2 11-ohs I just added, and hold those and pull that tight. You don't want slack in your thread at this point. You don't want slack ever in your thread, but you want to make sure you get this fairly tight so they have a good foundation to build the rest of your herringbone off of. So I picked up 2 more 11-ohs, and I'm passing through the 2 previous herringbone, or the 2 previous 11-ohs, and down through the ones that I just added. So now I've added 4. I've added 4 of my 11-ohs, 2 sitting next to 2. I'm going to do the same thing here with my 8-ohs. Pick up 2 8-ohs, and through my 2 11-ohs. Back up through the 2 8-ohs. Another 2 8-ohs. Through the 2 previous 8-ohs. And down the ones that I just added. I'm going to move on now to using the 11-ohs again. So 2 11-ohs, and through my 8-ohs, up through my 11-ohs, up through those 11-ohs, and 2 more 11-ohs, adding those 2 11-ohs next to the previous 2 11-ohs, and down through the 11-ohs I just added. And at this point now, I'm ready to bring this full circle. So I'm going to fold this little piece in on itself and pass through the 2 15-ohs at the very beginning. You want to make sure that you're passing through your beads here so that you're not twisting anything. All the beads are sitting directly next to each other, and you're not getting anything twisted. It's just a flat piece of ladder stitch that you folded in half, and now you're connecting the ends together. And I just went through one more time just to make sure that I had a nice connection there that wasn't going to come loose. So you should have something that looks like this. It's a little funny looking right now because it's only a very, very small wedge that we've created of this overall circle. So what we've created is just a very small little wedge in here, just like if you were to cut a little wedge out of a cake. And so you can see if I hold it this way, it does have the appearance of that larger piece where we have the colors exactly where they need to be, but it's just so small and it doesn't have much else holding everything in place. So it's very flimsy, and it's going to be a little difficult at the beginning to hold it just because there's not much to hold on to. So you just want to pay attention at the very beginning here, but then once you get in the rhythm of it and the piece is longer, it's going to be much easier to work with. So I'm coming out of my, see here, I'm coming out of my 15-0. Coming out of the 15-0, that is the left hand set of 15-0s. So as you noticed around here, I always picked up 2 rows or 2 columns, if you want to think about it like that, of each color seed bead. So I have here my 2 columns of my 15-0 seed bead. My thread's coming out the top of the one here on the left. So now I'm in position where I can start doing a herringbone stitch. I'm going to pick up 2 of my 15-0s and then go down through the, just that top bead there, just that top bead there in the right hand column. And as I pull that, the 2 that I'm adding are going to sit directly on top of the 2 below. And I'm going to move on to the next color here. I'm going to go up through just the first, or the top bead. The way that I'm holding it here, it's the top bead on, on the left-hand side of that first column of my 11-ohs. Pick up 2 11-ohs and go down through the second 11-0, that second bead. And now I can move on to the next bead. I'm going to go up through the next bead, which should be my top 8-0 in the left-hand column of my 2 columns of 8-0. Pick up 2 8-0s and then go back down, or go down through the right-hand side and just that top 8-0. And moving around here, you can see I'm kind of rotating this and working all the way around this. Go up through the top 11-0 here in my next set of 11-0s. And just like I've been doing, pick up 2 of the 11-0s and then go down through the top bead in the right-hand side of the 11-0s. So now I'm back to where I started. I've now added beads to each one of my sections here. So I'm going to then go up through, instead of just 1 seed bead, I'm going to go up through 2. So you want to make note that where you're going up through 2 seed beads is always going to be here between the 11s and the 15s. And this is right where essentially where one row, if you think about it like a row, where one row ends and the other row begins. So you'll know that that's the end and beginning of your row because it'll look different. And you'll also be going up through 2 beads to start your next herringbone section or herringbone row instead of just 1. So now again, starting back at square 1 here with my gold or my champagne, I'm going to pick up 2 15-0s, coming out the left bead, going down the right bead, and we're just going down the right bead, the top right bead. And then we're going up through the top left bead in that 11-0 section of herringbone, picking up 2 beads, and then going back down the 1 bead, the top bead on the right. And again here, up through the top, there we go, get that thread out of the way. Go through the top left bead in the herringbone on my 8-0s here. Pick up 2 8-0s and then go down through the top right bead. Up through the top left bead of my 11-0s, pick up 2, and then down through the top right bead. And now here is where we're going to go up through the top 2 left beads in the next section of herringbone instead of the top 1, because this is where we are jumping up to another row. And I'm going to continue this until I get to a point where I've made almost a complete circle, but I need to just tie or connect my ends together. You can see after just those 2 little rows that I did, it's already starting to look like a little wedge out of the larger section here. So we're going to continue with this a little bit more. And by a little bit more, I mean you want to continue until you have a total of 47 rows. So we've started with a couple rows with that ladder stitch. So you're not doing 47 additional. You want a total of 47 8-0s running along the outside. So the way that I know that I'm done, because sometimes it's hard to count, keep track of 47, is you're going to count just how many 8-0 seed beads you have along the outside here, and it should be 47. And the other thing you can do that helped me, so I didn't have to try to count tiny little beads and stay on top of it, was I just took a look and I saw, okay, I've got four seed beads so far. So it's like 4 rows of my herringbone. And I can now pull out the additional beads that I need to reach 47. I can put those 8-ohs aside, and then I know that once I'm done with those 8-ohs, I'm done with my bezel. I had pulled out 47 beads to start with, and then I was using those from one pile and pulling from another pile in order to just kind of keep track of where I was, because it can be a little difficult for someone like me to come in here and try to count the little seed beads. So that's just one way that you could do it. Certainly not necessary to the project or the pattern, but a good way to just keep track of where you are. Pull out the seed beads that you actually need, the total number that you need, and once you're done with them, you should be done with the number of rows. So I'm going to go ahead and continue working on this a little bit more so you can see how this progresses, and I'll check in with you maybe about halfway through or so you know what that looks like, and then of course show you how to finish it. Now that you've completed the entire 47 rows of your outside bezel here, your herringbone extension on your bezel, we're going to connect the two ends. So you can see here that my thread is coming out of my 11-oh row here, my 11-ohs. So I'm just going to take my thread and connect it from the seed bead that's coming out of on one side and go through the same seed bead on the other side. And then I'm going to go down through the seed bead next to that and cross over that space that I need to connect and go through the seed bead on the other side directly across from the seed bead that I'm coming out of. So I'm just connecting the seed beads that are first and last in each one of their rows or sections. And I'm going to go through this 8-oh here now and go through the 8-oh directly across. And I can kind of flip this here to keep working and go through the 8-oh and the 8-oh directly across on the other end. And you'll see this will start just pulling together and create a nice seamless donut. And since this is a seam, you may want to go through a couple times just to reinforce it. That way, if you have any of your thread or connections are a little not tight enough, you can go through and tighten those up a little bit. But if you pull tight as you go, you really shouldn't have a problem with that. Now onto the 15-ohs here. And this is a little bit trickier only because they are smaller and they're in the center here. So just slightly trickier to kind of get your needles through. I have this thread here from when I was adding thread. So I'm going to make sure that I cut all of that down and tie all of that off. So all the way around this seam, going up and down through the beads, connecting the beads on one side to their partner, the bead directly across from them. And once you've done this at least once, maybe twice, if you feel that you can still kind of see the seam there, you can go through again, and then I'll tighten things up a little bit more. Once you have that seamed up, go ahead and just cut off all of your threads. Make sure that you tie them and secure them and burn them down, or tie them and secure them before you burn them down. You don't want to just cut off a thread without making sure that it is tied and anchored well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to this, get rid of my extra thread here, and then we will talk about how to now secure a Rivoli in the center. We're now going to talk about how to connect these two individual pieces that we made. You're going to take a look at both your donut and your Rivoli and decide which is the top and which is the bottom. For the Rivoli, that's pretty easy because you want to just have that Rivoli crystal color showing up, and there's obviously a backside to the Rivoli, so you're going to have that facing down. If you have a Rivoli that doesn't have a back to it, that has just two, it's like a transparent crystal, then you may want to have to pick a front and back, but most Rivolis are going to have the crystal top and then a coating on the bottom. And then as far as your little herringbone, like extra halo here, you're just going to take a look at it and see if there's a side that stands out to you as being just looking a little nicer. Really, they should look the same, but if you feel like there's a little bit more gaps or someplace where maybe you weren't as consistent in pulling your thread, you may decide that there's one side that looks better than the other. And of course, another huge determining factor in the front and the back would be, where did you do your knot, and is that really visible? Because if I have a place like, I think maybe around here where I have a visible knot, I want to move that to the back. So now that I've decided that this is what my piece is going to look like combined, I'm going to actually flip this all over and I'm going to work on the back. I'm going to start by picking up one of the 15-0 seed beads along the inside of my herringbone. And I'm going to use this as a stop bead. So I'm just going to take my needle and thread and run through it once, run through it twice. And I'm going to place my Rivoli inside, again with the back facing up because I'm working on the back of the project. So now there isn't an exact 1-to-1 with the seed beads with the 15-0s here on the inside of the herringbone and the 11-0s on the outside of the bezel for our crystal here. But we are going to connect the 15-0s to the 11-0s of the bezel. So the 15-0s on this halo, or this herringbone sort of halo, we're going to connect the 15-0s to the 11-0s that they sit closest next to. And like I said, it's not going to be a complete 1-to-1. You're not going to have one 15-0 for every 11-0. So you may skip forward a couple, but you're going to just pick this up and connect it how it seems to want to fit, or how it seems to want to lay and sit together. So I'm coming out of one of those 15-0s, and I'm going to go through the 11-0 that is next to it on my bezel for my Rivoli. And then coming out of the bezel for the Rivoli, I'm just going to pass through whatever 15-0 is sitting there and whichever hole is closest. So whatever hole in the 15-0 is closest, I'm going to pass through that. And then I'm going to go through another 11 here. Now, depending on if you pass through more than once, I know sometimes you like to pass through more than once to, oh, that got a little stuck. Sometimes people pass through more than once just to get everything tight. And if you did do that, then what you can do, instead of going back and forth connecting 11s and 15s, you can actually go back and forth. The 15-0 shouldn't be any problem for you to get through. Since we really only passed those once, there's no reason to tighten those up. But what you can do if you run into any issues passing through your 11-0s is, instead of passing through the 11-0 itself, you can actually pass through or under the bridge thread between 11-0s. And you're probably going to want a sized 11 or 12 needle, but you can pass through the bridge thread running between 11-0s. And that will also give you something on the center here to anchor your thread on, as you then go back to the herringbone and find a 15 there to connect to. So I'm going to continue going all the way around, connecting to seed beads when I can, or the bridge thread if that's what is, if that's the easiest point to connect, you just want to make sure that you're going through that bridge thread. And it's perfectly fine to use the bridge thread because there should be a couple pieces of bridge thread going through there, so you're not just pulling on one piece, so that makes it a little more sturdy. And if you do brick stitch, you know that you use the bridge thread for that. So using the bridge thread to attach pieces isn't anything new or anything to be concerned about. So go through the beads themselves, or as necessary, or if you just prefer, go through the bridge thread or under the bridge thread. So essentially all you're doing is going and catching a 15-0, come back to the center, pick up an 11 or bridge thread, catch that, and then go back. And you're constantly sort of zigzagging your way all the way around till you're back to the beginning. So you can see here it's already started connecting. And on the front here, it'll look just like this. And everything will look a little bit more together because I'll have gone all the way around. So you shouldn't really see many gaps anywhere. And then that will be your completed little component here that we'll then use to build the rest of the bracelet. So as you can see here, I have 4 here that I can fit on the screen of my bezeled Rivolis, and then they are now nestled in that herringbone additional Rivoli or additional bezel that went around the outside. We're now going to start connecting these pieces to make all of these lengths, set them next to each other to make the bracelet. I have a little sample here of how I did the connection point. This one I still need to clean up a little bit, so forgive that little stray thread there. So I'm going to show you how to do this little connection. It's very, very simple. And you're going to use the existing seed beads that you already have on your piece, as well as an addition of some 3mm faceted rounds. You can also use 3mm rounds, 3mm pearls, any bead that's a 3mm. I found these and they just worked really well with the colorway, so I grabbed the faceted rounds here. So we're going to start here by working on the back side. So don't judge my back side. I did this one a little bit quickly for the video here. But you're going to start working on the back side, and you're only going to connect the bottom row of the herringbone. So sort of like that bottom layer of your Oreo cookie, you're only going to connect that bottom layer. Because this is the first, my first connection, I can start anywhere. I don't have anything, to compare it to or to line it up with yet. So I'm just going to go through one of my 8-0s and back through the 8-0, and that just serves as my stop bead. Once you've gone through that bead twice for your stop bead, just go through the next 8-0 as well. So your thread is going through 2 8-0s. And these are just the 8-0s that are part of that herringbone bezel. Okay, it can be tricky to kind of keep your tail thread out of the way. So now you're going to take 2 of the seed beads on 2 of the same seed beads, those 8-0s, on the other side here. And again, making sure that your piece is oriented so that it's facing down. And go through those 2, and then just pull so that that brings both of your pieces close together. And we're going to use these 2 seed beads on each bezel. And we're just going to go through them back and forth to create a connection. So through 2 on the one side of your bezel and 2 on the other side of your bezel, going back and forth and pulling tight to just get those guys to sit next to each other and form a nice tight connection. You have the 8-0s here, so you can go through several times. Not like the 15-0s where you have to worry about how many times your thread is going through. And you're not going to see a lot of thread because you're pulling this tight, and it's going to be kind of down there between your 2 pieces. So go ahead and reinforce it as much as you feel, as much as you're comfortable with, because you don't have to worry about breaking any beads like as if you were using 15 rows. So now what I'm going to do, because this connection of just 2 beads by itself can be a little flimsy, I don't love the way that that feels on its own. So what I'm going to do is, coming out of some of my 8-ohs here, I'm going to go through 2, and I'll show you on here what this is going to look like on the back here. I'll have the check bead on top and bottom. I'm going to go through the next 2 8-oh seed beads. So I've connected 2 8-oh seed beads on each side of on each bezel, and now coming out of the 2 that I was using in that step, I'm going to pass through another 2. I'm going to pick up one of my faceted rounds, and then I'm going to go through the same 8-oh on the other side of on the other bezel here. So I'm just going to go to the 8-oh that sits directly across from the 8-oh where I just came out, where my thread just came out, and where I picked up that 3mm bead. And then I'm going to go back through my 3mm bead and do a little bit back and forth here like we did in the previous step, where I'm just going through the 8-oh, my 3mm bead, through the 8-oh, and back through the 3mm bead. And I just want to do this a few times again to reinforce it, because this is where your piece will be moving the most, where the thread will be getting the most movement and sort of wear and tear. So you should now have your 2 sets of 2, so your 4 seed beads here in the center that are connected. We're skipping 1 seed bead, so there's 1 seed bead on either side here that has nothing happening. And then the next seed bead, we've got the seed bead, the check glass, and the seed bead, and those are all connected. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of that first little connection I made. So I'm going to go through my 8-oh here and pass through that 8-oh that we left alone and the 2 seed beads. The 2 seed beads at the very center here. Those are those ones that where we started. And again, I'm going to skip 1 8-oh. I'm going to go through that 8-oh, but I'm not going to do anything with it other than just go through it. And through another 8-oh. So this 8-oh now is the one that I'm going to now connect. I'm going to now add that 3mm bead. So I've got that 3mm bead, and that can just kind of fall down there. And then I'm going to go through the same 8-oh on the opposite side on my other bezel. And again, just going back through that 3mm bead and through the 8-oh. And I like to go through the 8-oh from both sides so that you're not always going from so you're not always going in and out of the 8-oh on the same side, or you don't want to always approach it from the same angle or same side of the hole, because you want the thread to sort of straddle and sit like a V around that bead, and that will help center your bead, your 3mm bead, between those seed beads. So I've done this a couple times now, reinforced it, so it should be pretty good. So now I can just kind of move my needle and thread down to where I'm ready to tie it off. And you can see here on the front, you have a very subtle connection. You can see in this one too, they look the same. It's a very subtle connection of just connecting in the center and adding a bead that blends very nicely with the rest of your beads, but is able to elongate that connection for you. So next thing I'm going to do here, since I had done a sample and I did this one, I'm now going to line these up, and I'll just identify where I want to connect here. I'll just make sure that I have it centered and do the same technique here in the center to connect all 4 of these pieces together. Once you have all of your pieces together here, we're going to add the clasp. So I've already added on this side one end of my clasp, and I'm going to show you here how I did that with this larger piece. I'm using a clasp that uses that has a place for a 14 millimeter Rivoli to sit in the center. So it'll just kind of continue that look the whole way. So here we have one that's got 2 loops on it, and that'll just be a little bit more stable given how wide this piece is here. So if you have something a little bit on the wider side, it's nice to use a 2 or 3 loop clasp. So just like I added, or just like I connected my components, I'm going to add the clasp in the same way. I'm going to work again on this bottom layer of my eidos. And I'm going to do this visually, but you can always count and figure out the halfway point here, and then straddle that halfway point and just center your clasp on there. But I've done the rest visually, and sometimes I think visually is better just because then you're choosing your position based on what looks right, not necessarily on the count. Sometimes when you've got so many seed beads like this, the count can throw you off a little bit, only because seed beads can be slightly larger or bigger, or larger or smaller. So I don't mind doing it visually. So here I am just lining it up, and actually looking in the camera there is actually helping me quite a bit because I can look at it head on there. So I'm just lining it up here and looking at where I'm going to connect this first loop. And I'm going to go through that 8/0 seed bead. And I'll use that also as my stop bead. I don't mind using the bead as my stop bead as well as keeping it in the project, because I'm not going to really see that little bit of thread that's going around the outside, especially since it's on the bottom layer of my bracelet. So here I'm just going to pick up one of my 3 millimeter rounds. And so I'm continuing the same sort of look the whole way down the bracelet, where I'm using the 3 millimeter rounds to connect my components. So you can think of your clasp as just another component. And I'm on the back side of my piece here. So I want to also make sure that I have the back side of my clasp facing up as well. So I've got back and back. And just make sure that everything looks right when I flip it over. So I'm just going through the loop on the clasp and back through my back through my 3 millimeter round and back through my 8/0. So I'm connecting my clasp in a very similar way, similar to how I connected the components. The only difference really is that on the clasp here, you have a loop instead of seed beads that you're connecting to. But everything else is basically the same. And you want to make sure that you're pulling that tail thread too, because as you're pulling on the other components, that tail thread can get pulled through that stop bead, especially since it's an 8/0 and it's kind of big. So I'm going to reinforce this, go back through a couple more times. I'm not using a wire guard because I don't like the way that the wire guard is going to change the way that my clasp sits on my piece here. You can certainly use a wire guard, but the wire guard for me is going to add too much space. It's going to add some extra length that I don't really need, and it's going to sit a little bit funny because it's going to kind of offset how my clasp sits. So I'm not using a wire guard on purpose. So now I've got the one piece connected, and I'm just going to take a look here and see where I want to connect my other loop. I left two, was it two? Yep, I left 2 8/0s in between on the other side, in between connection points. So I'm going to skip over 2 8/0s and go through here, go through my 4th or my 3rd 8/0. Oops, and make sure that if you have, oopsie, accidentally, skipped over an 8/0. So you just want to make sure that you're not you don't have any exposed thread where you don't want it, that's a really easy thing to do on these pieces. So I'm going to make sure that I get rid of any exposed thread. There we go. So see, even people who make YouTube videos have all the same issues and frustrations that you do. Getting my thread stuck, getting it looped around things I don't want it to be looped around. And same on this side here, I'm just going to pick up one of my 3mm beads, go through the loop on the clasp, and then back through. And again, I do this a few times to have several layers of that thread looping around the clasp. Little metal loops like this can be a place where your thread can wear down over time. And so that's why the wire guards are a really nice thing to use. But like I said, I've just decided not to use them in this project on this particular bracelet that I'm making, only because it's going to make it sit a little differently. So now once you've got this clasp connected on this side, you're going to just connect it on the other side, which I've already done. I just removed the tongue, the other piece of the clasp, so that it's a little bit easier to show you here. And now that I've got that piece connected, I'm just going to go back to my tail thread here, which has become a little bit shorter than I want it to be, but that's okay. And I'm just going to tie it off. It's a little bit tricky because it got a little shorter. It pulled through my beads and it became a little shorter than I wanted it to be, but that's okay. I can still work with it. Pick up that little itty bitty little piece of tail thread and make a knot over it, knot those two ends together, and then hide your tail thread. And then once you've got your tail thread hidden, we'll use the thread burner to burn it down, or we will cut it, whichever is your preference. Got that. And just burn that down. And then on this piece here, I'll probably just go back and kind of take care of any little pieces that I have, any little thread ends, because when I'm doing this on a video, sometimes I go kind of fast. I take some shortcuts, so I don't always get it all burned down as much as I want. So here's the very last thing you need to do for this bracelet, and that is to add a little glue and put your clasp in there. To put the Rivoli in your Rivoli clasp here, it's very, very simple. All you're going to need is a little bit of glue. You can use this E6000, or you can use something like a Loctite, or if you have another glue for jewelry that you like, as long as it holds well. And this is E6000 I like because it's easy to clean up, and that's something that's always very important for me, particularly when I do crafts of any type. Crafts, jewelry making, pottery, anything like that. The occasional woodworking project, nothing big. So I've got a little dab of glue in there. You don't need much because it's going to squirt out a little bit and spread out. And then you just want to drop that in there, centered, and press it down. And just take a look at it from directly overhead to make sure that it is centered in the bezel. So now once you have that together, you're going to just let it sit for a little bit to dry. You can let it dry overnight, but it'll definitely be, with the E6000 and the Loctite, it'll be ready to handle very, very quickly, within a matter of minutes. So there you go. There is our beautiful drama queen there with all her different colors, subtle but different colors. And yeah, I would say quite the show-stopping drama queen there. Hope you enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts on the project. If you're also interested in more tutorials just like this one, click on that subscribe button so that you're notified as soon as we have new videos available.